Hello, and welcome to episode 3 on What If the United States Split Overnight. Let's get started. To start off with, we have a new economic alliance being created in the Northeast, right over here. This economic alliance with the states of, I'll just call it Massachusetts, New York City, New Jersey, and Maryland, all are founding members of this alliance, with its goal being that in the Northeast, the economic activity in the Northeast is very similar to each other, so they decided to just join in and make their own federation. Soon thereafter, Pennsylvania and Virginia joins, including Carolina as well. And this economic alliance is, of course, very successful, as the ideals of all these states are very similar to each other. So after that, we have the admission of Nevada into California. Now, as I said in last episode, after the independence of Las Vegas, or Henderson as it might be called, Nevada wouldn't survive as long as they were if they still had Las Vegas. Well, their time is up now, and they're joining California. They were already in the Californian sphere of influence, so nothing much is going to change for Nevada. Moving on. In Arizona, we have a new referendum for the Hopi Nation. You remember in the first episode, the Hopi Reservation was given a choice to either join Arizona or become independent or join the Navajo Nation. They decide to stick with Arizona. Well, now in this second referendum, things are a bit different. They decide to become independent. Now, of course, after this, the land bridge that connected Arizona to the Hopi Reservation, this was one of the main reasons why the Hopi Reservation declared its independence in the first place, was because of this land bridge, because it was really hard for them to get to Arizona from that land bridge. So that's why they declared their independence, which creates some really weird border gore. All right, moving on over. We have something very interesting happening in the Southern Federation. Oklahoma decides it's going to leave the Federation. Now, the reason for this is because in the Southern Federation, most of the wealth happens to occur along the Mississippi River because that's where most of the trade is. Well, Oklahoma is much away from the Mississippi River, so they're missing out on all the riches that come with the trade from the Mississippi River. So they decide, you know what, we're going to do this on their own here, and they're going to leave. Now, this is definitely protested by the Southern Federation, and they reject Oklahoman independence. Oklahoma immediately goes to Texas, who sends an ultimatum to the Southern Federation demanding Oklahoman independence. Oklahoma did this because they said that they would join the Texan sphere of influence if they gained independence. So Texas was like, yeah, sure, we do need another nation in our sphere of influence, so I'll do it for you. So, faced with this, they decide to grant Oklahoma independence under the looming threat of Texas. Because if Texas got involved in this, they would be screwed. So, because of that, Oklahoma regains its independence, and it, of course, joins the Texan sphere of influence as it promised to Texas. Immediately afterwards, the effects of this independence movement gains momentum across the entire Federation. Because there is another state out there that does not border the Mississippi River and also has not been receiving the economic gains. Alabama. Alabama, seeing the success of the independence of Oklahoma, decides it's going to try its hand at its own independence because they've been suffering the same things that Oklahoma complained about when it declared its independence, being that since they don't border the Mississippi River, they're not getting any of the profits from it. So they decide to they confidently go to the Southern Federation and ask for independence. Now, the Southern Federation knows that if Alabama declares independence, the whole Federation will basically fall apart because Kentucky and Texas would not really, it would be kind of weird for them to be in the Federation because of, how the borders are. So they go to Alabama and they say, no. Well, that was a very dumb idea by the Southern Federation because Alabama goes to Georgia and Florida asking for help. And of course, Georgia and Florida agree. However, since they aren't as strong as Texas, the Southern Federation thinks they can take them on, and so they still refuse Alabama independence. Now, at this point, unrest in Alabama is growing by the second, and after the Southern Federation denied its independence, that was the breaking point for it. And so, rebel pockets pop up all over Alabama cities demanding independence. Now, the Southern Federation isn't really that strong, so like they are like a medium-sized power. I'd say they're about on par with states like Arizona and Pennsylvania in terms of economy and stuff like that, but they're not that strong. So this rebellion is definitely a big surprise to them. So they try their best to quell it. Rebel forces near Huntsville are dialed down a little bit. All over in Montgomery, they gain ground. The Alabamans gain ground in Montgomery, which is their strongest part of the rebellion. This is their strongest city. They move over and connect with the rebellion in the south, forming a united front. Now, at this point, Georgia and Florida are like, okay, we can help them out here, and they start sending supplies into the Alabaman rebels in the Southern Federation. Georgia decides, you know what? Might as well get some profit off this, and they officially declare war on the Southern Federation. Immediately, Georgian forces start invading into Alabama and into Tennessee. Tennessee being a very loyal member of the Southern Federation. I did say before that if Alabama left, they would leave, but that's more on to Kentucky than Tennessee because the Memphis area is right over here, and Tennessee probably wouldn't mind being in the Southern Federation even if Kentucky left. So that would just be Kentucky leaving if that was the case. So Georgian forces move up, and Georgia is a pretty strong state, so they move on pretty quickly in. Kind of messed up that there. And a stabilized front is established in the north. Georgian forces help out the Alabaman rebels over there in that city, and they move into the Huntsville Rebellion. In the south, in the Mobile Rebellion, we have the encirclement of some military troops of the Southern Federation, and they are eventually crushed. The Mobile Rebellion, like, keep in mind, this is a very unitary rebellion, so all these are working together. The Mobile Rebellion goes in, even going into Mississippi a little bit. They go into Mississippi, and they try to cut off Mississippi's coastline, and they are successful in doing so. Keep in mind that the Southern Federation is very overwhelmed by this since they're dealing with fronts from, let me just put some black lines in here. They're dealing with this front right over here from Georgia. They're dealing with this massive rebellion right over here. They're dealing with these pockets right over here. And they're dealing with this front right over here. So that's a lot of fronts that they have to deal with. And their military isn't really that strong. So they're kind of screwed here, honestly. The Appalachian Mountains do make it a bit slow for Georgia to advance forward. However, once they get past it, they can steamroll through. They eventually meet up with the Huntsville Rebellion over here. I kind of messed up that front line a little bit. They eventually meet up with the Huntsville front line, and they decide to unite together. The combined Georgia and Huntsville Rebellion keep moving deeper into Alabama. And they decide to go for this middle pocket right over here, which in the time that Georgia, took, expanded and actually met up with this little rebellion right over here in the south. A new plan was made to connect these two front lines together, and so they make their attack. The attack is successful at first, however, they are slowed down. Reason for this is because most of the forces are in this area right over here. Well, not most of the forces, but a lot of the forces are deployed right over here because the area between Montgomery and Huntsville, since the forces split into two, they're going this way and they're going that way, so there's a lot of troops that are right here. So they try their best to connect with each other, and they are successful in doing so. Because, the forces are very weakened, even if there's a lot of them. So a new, fully united Alabama front is created, and they decide to move in to connect with the Mobile front line, which is gaining ground. And they also would like to cut off some of the some of the Federative forces over here in the South. The Federative forces know this, and they make a desperate retreat back to Mississippi. However, the Alabamans are swift in their attacks, and a lot of forces are still trapped in this massive encirclement in Alabama. The Alabama forces eventually invade and cut off the rest of the Federative forces located in here. A new Georgian invasion in the South is created and eventually meets up with the Alabama rebel forces. They eventually move up. And at this point, the Southern Federation realize, we're basically screwed here. So, with this, a new treaty is declared. Alright, so this is the peace treaty between the Southern Federation, Alabama, and Georgia. So, as you can see, Alabama is granted full independence and even gets a little extension coastline from Mississippi in here because Mississippi was one of the main contributors to the Southern Confederacy. Missouri didn't really care, honestly. And Georgia, for their participation in the war, gained Chattanooga, Tennessee, from the Tennessee portion of the Southern Federation. Now, after this war is settled, many Tennesseans or Tennesseers, or whatever they're called, many people from Tennessee are very angered by Georgia annexing the region of Chattanooga. And a sort of domino effect happens in the Southern Federation, which being that Tennessee decides to leave the Federation. Kentucky soon follows, followed by Missouri, and after all of this, at the end of it all, the only states that remain in the Southern Federation are Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. The Southern Federation, once a powerful federation that had multiple states in it, now is just a rump state of its former self. And thus, because of this, they decide that the only hope for their survival is to join in on the Texan sphere of influence. Missouri also follows in joining this alliance, or this sphere of influence, because Missouri would want to have some economic benefits, just like they had in the Federation. Because Missouri was a new member of the Federation. Keep in mind they weren't a founding member. They joined in on episode 2. So they just joined in, so they didn't really care for the Federation that much. They thought that joining in would, get them some economic benefits, but it didn't really get them much. So they just left because they just didn't really care anymore. So Texas now has a lot more power over the east coast of the United States. Well, not really east coast, but the the southern region of the United States, they have more power over that. So, moving on over to the Midwest, we have another interesting thing happening. So you know how at the start of the episode I talked about how there was a economic alliance that formed in the East Coast. Well, inspired by that, the Midwestern states decided to do the exact same thing. They formed their own economic alliance. The founding members are Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, and Chicago. Soon thereafter, in this economic alliance, the states of Iowa, Ohio, and Superior join in on the side of this alliance as well. Now, keep in mind, Missouri is in the Texan sphere of influence, so they don't have to join this alliance. So they decide to stay out of it because Texas is in the process of creating their own economic alliance. Little foreshadowing there. Kentucky decides that since they're a new state, they might as well stay out of this to focus on themselves, which is fine by the alliance. So, these are the official borders of the Midwestern Economic Alliance. They will definitely expand in the future, probably to Kentucky and Tennessee, but for now, this is a very powerful economic alliance. And, since the Midwestern states have their industries, it's the same thing with the East Coast. Their industries are pretty similar. A lot of these states are what we now refer to as Rust Belt states. Like Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, all of those states are Rust Belt states. So it would make sense for them to form an economic alliance with each other. Now, moving on over to some more interesting things happening. I will say that if the United States collapsed, of course, as I said in earlier episodes, a lot of stuff would be going on in the world. Mainly the fact that since the United States imploded, many other states in other countries decide that they might have a shot at independence, seeing how successful some of the states can be, like California and Texas, bringing their own spheres of influence, in the Midwest making their own economic alliance. Definitely not the Southern Federation, I do say that much. But a very prominent state in specifically Canada decides to go on their own. And that, of course, is Quebec. Quebec has had a very well-known independence movement for a while now. I think it has dialed down over the years, but if the United States imploded, Quebec residents would probably be like, "Hey, we could probably do that too." Well, not like implode, but like, declare independence. So they go to Canada and they're like, "Hey, we want to be independent." And of course, reasonably, Canada's like, "No." And Quebec is like, "Okay, we will make a compromise to you. We won't gain independence with all our land because, well, quick side note here. There was a movement to have Quebec gain independence with some of their lands not present, like their northern lands. Because if Quebec gained independence, all of these regions right over here, with Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island, all of them would be disconnected from Canada. However, Quebec argued that since Canada annexed the northern regions of since they annexed upstate New York and Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine, they don't have to worry about that anymore. This is a very valid argument. And they also argued with this reduced territory, keep in mind that the reduced territory they're referring with is like that, roughly. So the Newfoundland and Labrador would not be disconnected from the rest of Canada. Canada decides, all right, fine, we'll give you a referendum. A referendum is handed to Quebec, and unsurprisingly, an overwhelming majority votes to leave Canada. So, officially, the independence of Quebec is proclaimed. Now, as you see, not all of Quebec has gained independence because, they accepted the compromise deal to give up all of their land up north here to Canada in exchange for their freedom or their independence. So, that's pretty much it for Quebec independence. Now, I will say that Canadian sphere of influence over the Northeast will definitely decrease over time with this, but don't worry. The northeastern states are still very loyal to Canada, as Canada has given them many benefits since they joined Canada. I think the area with the most contention probably would be Western New York, but you know, it's not that bad. Don't worry. So Quebec now has its independence. All right, so that does it for episode 3 on What If the United States Collapsed Overnight. To recap, we have the joining of Nevada into California, we have the independence of the Hopi Reservation and some land exchanges with Arizona. We have the Southern Federation, most prominently in this episode, the Southern Federation collapsing. We have the expansion of Georgia, and we have the Midwestern Alliance forming, as well as the Midwestern Economic Alliance forming, as well as the Eastern Economic Alliance forming at the start of the episode. And finally, we leave off on the independence of Quebec in Canada. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in episode 4. All right, bye-bye.